They smirked when she stepped onto the archery field. The polished competitors with their carbon limbs and scope-tuned bows whispered to each other, amused by the woman with the old leather case and laced-up work boots. She didn't look like a contender. But as Leona Ren pulled out her yew-wood longbow, Silence tiptoed in, she was no stranger to this. That morning had started quietly, just as most did on her Edge of Forest farm. Pale sunlight slipped through the pine branches and scattered across her kitchen table. Her hands, warm from soil and string wax, curled around a chipped mug of black coffee. Along the kitchen walls were framed photos memories in sepia and fading color. Her great-grandmother perched on a stump with a bow resting across her lap. Her father, standing beside a whitetail with a wooden arrow still notched to the string. Then there was young Leona Freckled, wide-eyed, bundled in a too-large coat, learning to draw for the first time. She sipped slowly, the steam curling around her face. Her phone buzzed. "You really going out to Silver Pines?" Warren asked, his voice familiar and gently cautious. "I am," she said, already tightening the laces of her boots. He hesitated. "You know how they are with newcomers, especially ones who don't come flashing brands and chrome limbs. They'll just have to deal with it. You sure this is the right move? I've shot in rain, through wind, from a hillside in January. I can handle a little attitude." She ended the call, her expression unreadable. Not angry, just steady. From the foot of her bed, she pulled out the old wooden case. Its hinges groaned, but inside was care her great. Grandmother's bow, restored over long winters, its curve smooth, grip darkened by generations of hands. She ran her palm over the limb. This wasn't for display. This was history tight-strung and still alive. Leona packed it with handmade arrows, each fletched with barred feathers. She slid her quiver across her back and buckled it without needing to look. Before she left, she stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, no makeup, hair tied in a low knot, jacket faded at the shoulders. She looked like someone who belonged to the woods, not a stadium range. She looked like herself. And that was more than enough. The Silver Pines Archery Center was all shine and symmetry. Polished wood panel buildings, neatly mown fields, and flag markers flapping in precise rows. Every lane was pristine, marked, and leveled, with bow racks gleaming under the noon sun. Her old hatchback grumbled into the gravel parking lot like it didn't belong, and maybe it didn't. Between the lifted trucks and glossy black SUVs, it stood like a scar on glass. Leona stepped out and stretched, feeling the stairs before even closing her door. Her canvas duffel and long case swayed as she walked past men in performance jerseys and women in matching team kits. Every bow she passed looked like it came from a lab, built for perfection and polished for show. At the registration tent, a young man looked up with polite disinterest. "You here for the local event?" "Number just using the 70-meter range." He blinked. "That's for advanced shooters." She nodded. "I know." The pause stretched longer than it needed to. Finally, he slid the day-use form across the counter. "It's $35, and you'll need to wear the field badge." She handed over the money without hesitation. Her fingers bore dirt from the garden and scars from wood splinters. They didn't shake. After pinning the tag to her chest, she walked across the green. Conversations dimmed slightly. Whispers followed. "Is she serious? She brought a longbow?" You'd think someone would warn her. Her eyes stayed forward. She picked the farthest lane, the one where the wind whispered loudest and the sun fell flat against the field. There were no crowds here. Only one adjacent archer, Jax Calder. His rig sat on a rest, lenses gleaming. He was stretching, half watching her with a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. She unrolled her mat, set her bow down, removed her arrows and arranged them with the kind of care that comes only with repetition. "You planning to hunt geese or just scare 'em off?" Jax called out. She didn't answer. She was measuring wind. "I think there's a beginner lane down the hill," he added with a chuckle. Still nothing. Then someone else walked by behind her and whispered to a friend, "That thing doesn't even have a sight pin. Maybe it's decorative." She bent to string the bow. The old wood curved against the tension, creaking slightly as it accepted the draw. She checked its balance, her grip, the draw weight. Her eyes flicked to the target. 70 meters, small center ring. A gust brushed through the flags. It felt like home. "I give her 3 arrows before she's embarrassed enough to leave," someone muttered behind her. Jax laughed under his breath. "1, if she tries to aim." But Leona wasn't listening. She was already aligning, already remembering the slope of her family's backwoods range, already counting heartbeats. She pulled the first arrow. and all the noise began to fade. She anchored in silence. No click of sights, no murmurs from a spotter, just wind brushing her braid and the familiar tension humming in the yew-wood limbs. Her eyes were on the yellow center of the target 70 meters away. One deep breath in, a slow release. Thud. The arrow landed tight in the red ring. Not bad, for a stick and string, came Jax's voice again, loud enough for others nearby to hear. He stepped closer, his shooting tab looped lazily around his fingers. You warming up, or was that the big show? Leona pulled another arrow, knocked it without a word. The second landed closer to center, then the third just grazing the line. Now the laughter stopped, not gone but quieter. A young man 2 lanes down leaned into his group. That grouping's tighter than mine. That can't be beginner form, someone whispered. She's pulling bare bono stabilizer, no clicker. By her 5th shot, a small cluster had formed behind the spectator line. Competitors on break, coaches checking schedule saw drawn to the quiet woman in faded canvas and boots, shooting like she didn't hear them at all. Jax returned to her lane, resting his bow on the rail like he was taking a stroll through a gallery. You shoot like someone who knows what they're doing, he admitted, tone still laced with doubt. She didn't respond. But you know this is long range, right? Precision territory. We're not throwing hay bales here. Leona adjusted her stance and continued her work measuring wind flags, scribbling notes into a narrow field journal she pulled from her jacket pocket. Pages filled with angles, draw weights, humidity calculations. Each scribble neat, intentional. Jax watched her. That from YouTube or just instinct? She glanced up once. From the woods. Jax raised a brow. Cute. The crowd chuckled nervously. Then, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, he added, All right then. You're pulling groups, I'll give you that. But how about something real? Leona turned, one eyebrow arched. A wager, Jax said, stepping back and raising his voice. Let's see that stick of yours hit the center of the smallest ring. 1 arrow, 70 meters, inner yellow, clean hit. She straightened, dusted her fingers on her thigh. And what do you get if I miss? She asked quietly. Jax smiled, enjoying the sound of the crowd beginning to circle. You pack up, no hard feelings. Just admit you're not up to this tier and call it. And if I hit? She asked, still calm. Jax's expression faltered for half a breath. Then he shrugged, laughing. Sure, if you hit dead center from that distance with that setup, I'll clean your arrows for the rest of the season. Hell, I'll even carry your gear to your car. A few chuckles echoed behind them. One of Jax's teammates leaned over to whisper, Don't make bets you'll regret. Jax grinned wider. What do you say? 1 arrow. Center ring, all or nothing. Leona stared at the target, wind fluttering the edge of her sleeve. She thought of the ridge back home, the frost in spring when she first learned to read drift, the way her great-grandmother used to hum while fletching arrows, the first time she hit a tree knot from 100 paces without a marker. 1 arrow, she said. If I hit, you leave the line. Today. Jax blinked. What? You clean my gear and you step off the field. 1 shot. That's my price. His smile flickered. Then it returned. Deal. Someone in the crowd whistled. Someone said a spotter. A voice called. Somebody film it, said another. Phones lifted. Leona rolled her shoulder. Her breath was even. The world had already narrowed down to a bow, a string, a heartbeat, and a distant yellow dot. Jax backed up. All yours, Ren. Leona stepped into position. Not to impress, not to prove, but to remind herself of what lived in her blood. A hush fell over the range. Even the usual rhythm of string pulls and target thumps seemed to pause, like the field itself was waiting to breathe. Leona planted her boots at the line, the toes of her worn soles brushing the chalked edge. The string hummed in her fingers natural, familiar, alive. Her great-grandmother's bow creaked as it bent under draw, the grain of the wood catching sunlight. The wind had shifted slightly left to right, just a whisper but enough to matter at 70 meters. She watched the streamers flutter gently downrange, then closed her eyes for a breath. 1 inhale, deep and steady. 1 exhale, slow and anchoring. The voices behind her vanished. The field stretched before her like a memory. No audience, no ego, just target and time. She opened her eyes, drew. The bowstring pressed into her cheek, and in the gap between thoughts, she felt the stillness rising in echo of every time she'd ever stood alone in the forest clearing, every silent morning when a single shot meant meat on the table, or coming home empty. That raw connection pulsed through her limbs. Her fingers released. The arrow flew not like a launch, but like a decision. Swift and certain, it carved the air in a smooth, unflinching arc. Then, ping, sharp, ringing, unmistakable. The arrow struck dead center. A perfect shot. Silence cracked wide open. Someone gasped. Another let out a soft, "No way." The group that had gathered behind her stood frozen, some with mouths slightly open, others staring through scopes just to confirm what they'd heard. Even the range manager emerged from the clubhouse, squinting across the field. A moment later, the spotter at the far bench raised a hand and called, "Center ring, inner yellow, confirmed." Still, Leona didn't turn around. She stepped back from the line and knelt to unstring her bow. Calm, composed, not victorious, just finished. Jax's face was hard to read. His arms were crossed tight across his chest, lips pressed into a thin line. His teammates didn't speak. The laughter that had followed him earlier now hung somewhere behind them, like a distant echo they couldn't take back. He approached slowly. He paused. That was impossible. "No," Leona replied softly, tightening the bowstring for storage. "Just rare." He exhaled, staring down the range. "You really meant for me to step off the line?" "I did." Jack scratched the back of his neck. "You've probably done that shot 100 times. "No," she said. "That one was for today." He blinked. "Well, a deal's a deal." He turned, walked back to his lane, and began packing up his rig. No muttering, no excuses. Just quiet obedience to the promise he'd made. As he left the field, someone clapped. Then another. Soon, a wave of scattered applause rippled across the spectators. Not loud, not celebratory, but respectful, earned. The silver-haired man who had been watching earlier from the coaching box approached. "That wasn't luck," he said. "That was precise." Leona nodded once. "That was my family's aim." He extended a hand. "James Lockley. I manage the regional qualifiers. If you're competing next month, I'd like to see your name on the bracket." She shook his hand. "Leona Ren, I'll be there." Another young archer stepped forward, pulling off his glove. "How do you manage drift without a stabilizer?" "Balance," she said. "The bow does the rest if you respect it." "Would you teach?" he asked quickly. Leona looked past him at the cluster of others lingering nearby. Not jeering now, curious, humbled, intrigued. Jax hadn't returned, but his presence still lingered in their hesitance. A few of them held notebooks or phones, unsure whether to approach. "I'll teach," she said, "but not if you're only here to beat the next person. You learn to shoot so you never have to shout." They nodded, and she motioned them forward. For the next hour, she walked them through everything. Wind reading, anchor point discipline, natural breath control. How pressure isn't something you feel, it's something you release. She showed them her notebook, the notes from years of trial, corrections on arrow weight versus draw length, paper tests from cold mornings by the river. They listened, truly listened, even the ones who had laughed the loudest. At the end, one of the younger girls with a recurve asked, "Why don't you compete more?" Leona smiled gently. "I didn't come here to prove myself to others. I came to remember what I already knew." As the sky began to soften into shades of amber, the range started to empty. Laughter and conversation resumed not at her, but near her, around her, with her. She walked back to her hatchback alone, just as she'd come. As she set her case in the trunk and closed it with a soft thump, her phone buzzed. "Warren, how was it?" She stared at the message for a moment, then typed, quiet, but loud in the right ways. On the drive home, the field stretched out golden and familiar, pines blurred by like old friends waving from the road's edge. In her rearview mirror, the still towers of the range disappeared behind a bend. And in her chest, something settled. Not pride, not revenge, just clarity. She had not changed the world today, but she had cracked open a corner of it just enough for someone like her to step through next time without needing to prove a thing.